Hello, I'm the what some people call the old gardener. I'm Jim Bennett, and I have been involved in research and the growing of tomatoes for better than 70 years. Back in the 70s, I did a lot of research with tomatoes, and then in the 80s and early 90s, I had a network television show, and on that show, we tried to set the world's record for tomatoes. We began averaging about 150 pounds of tomatoes per plant. Now, I want to show you, standing out in my tomato garden, a simple way of developing a super tomato plant. I don't care what kind of tomatoes you have in the garden, as long as they're alive and healthy, you can develop a super tomato plant. Now, what we're looking for are suckers, and you probably need to sucker your tomato plants anyway. Let me show you some examples of a sucker. Here is a sucker right here, and all you have to do is lean it one way and lean it another way, and it snaps right out. Then what you do is you snap this off and that limb off, and they usually come off very easily. And then what I do to clone me what I call a super sucker tomato plant, I choose one that has multiple blooms on it. Ones that have blooms that number at least 6 different blossoms. If you choose a tomato plant that has 2 or 3 blossoms on it, you're actually cloning something that's not going to be as productive. Cloning, you're developing a plant that is just like the mother plant that it came off of. What I do is I walk through my tomato garden and I find the plants that are excelling far above any other plants that have established themselves as being great plants and seem to be dealing with everything in the garden, and they are the plants that I take the suckers from. And the sucker forms between the main stem and the limb. And it's easy to find one. Just choose one that's 8 to 10 inches, 12 inches long. Break off the leaves and make a clean plant out of it. And then what you do, and here's how we make this rooting container. We use a Folgers can, just like I said, and we find a container, a planting plot, that is the same size diameter as this, and the ridge here settles down on the Folgers container, and we put about 1/3 of the way of water, and the water comes up through the mix and roots these tomato plants. It's an easy way to get some super tomato plants. Now here's the thing, these tomato plants are called suckers because they suck the energy from the mother plant. And it's a good thing to sucker some of them. But if you're going after a multiple pounds of tomatoes per plant, I leave the majority of the suckers on. Then I take these suckers and I place them in a shady place. Usually I only put 5 to 6 tomato plants, suckers, into a container like this, because in 5, 6, 7 days when they root, in a week's time, when you separate them, you don't want to damage the roots when they come apart. Okay, let me sit this down. I want to give you some more information about planting these super sucker tomatoes. Now listen to this. Listen carefully now, because we take the sucker from a mother plant and we choose the one that's got 6 or more blossoms on it, and they need to be 8 to 10 inches long. Break off all the leaves except the main leaves on top. Then we root those, stick them into the moist container, and we root them. Then after taking the sucker from the mother plant, if you live in the South, you can take a sucker from a sucker and you have improved the plant even more, because the sucker is the healthiest really part of that tomato plant. It is sucking the energy. It's determined. It's a selfish little plant, part of the tomato plant, and it's going to root and prosper like it's going to take all the energy. It's going to steal all the nutrients and everything from the mother tomato plant. So we can take a sucker from a mother sucker, all right, and then we take a sucker from a sucker, and we have a super, super duper tomato plant. But just for the sake of everything today, let's just take the first sucker off the mother plant, all right? And then we'll use that sucker and root it. We'll come back and plant it in the garden and where we're growing our tomatoes. And here's what develops. You'll have a successful planting because you're going to be planting some in April or May, and then you're going to be planting some in June and July. And those that you're planting in June and July are going to be stronger plants because they are the sucker plants. And because you cloned them with 6 or more blossoms on them, they're going to be producing more tomatoes than the tomato plants prior. The ones you got from the store, the ones you grew yourself. Now, I know you're asking, what type of plant do I use out here in my garden? We use Better Boys, Park Swapper Improved, and those work extremely well for us because we have nematodes, and those are nematode resistant. And by planting those, we help to defeat the nematodes, and they've got a wonderful amount of resistance to other things, and they've got wonderful, wonderful, very tasteful tomato that you can harvest from. Let's see if I've got any tomatoes out here that need to be picked this morning. Well, no, I don't see anything right off. We must have picked them too closely yesterday. But there'll be some this afternoon. You know, 6 to 8 days in the shade, and if you want to sit them out in the sun one day so they can get used to the sun, and then plant your plants laying down in a hole. You lay them down in this hole because by laying them down, you want to plant them shallow, no more than about 4 or 5 inches deep on their side. And before, you know, within an hour's time, they'll be standing straight up. Now in that same soil, and I mix up an area, 2 or 3 feet wide because I want to draw the roots out into the rest of the garden. I don't want the roots, you know, up close, just sticking to the plant. So spread your fertilizer out. I mix up a mixture of 1/3 Epsom salt and 1/3 calcium nitrate, and then 1/3 Portland cement. Mix that together, and I'll sprinkle that over an area. And by the way, that calcium nitrate is a slow release calcium nitrate because it adds calcium to the soil, and that's where you get your blossom end rot from, because there's not enough calcium in the soil. Now you've taken your sucker and you have the super sucker and you've laid the tomato plant down in the garden. You've got it shallow, remembering that the tomato plant is a tropical plant and it likes warm soil. Don't plant it too deep, because what will happen, the roots will stop growing at the 5 or 6 inch area deep into the soil, and you can't get the, well, by planting it shallow, it can get the moisture, it can get the fertilizer, it can get everything it needs readily available within 2 or 3 days. When you water it, the water will get to it immediately, so the plant can rebound from stress, okay? You lay it down, you grow it that way. Be sure to put a cage on it. Now you notice that we use a lot of post here. The post we use to hold up our cages. You see that? And we run ropes through these, and these ropes hold the cages up to keep them from collapsing or falling over, because we can have anywhere from 30, 40, 50, maybe even 60 pounds of tomatoes on a single plant at any given time. And if we just use tomato cages, well, it'll crush those tomato cages. I've seen them fold up like a cheap spring, you know, just boom, they fold up. But anyway, we plant that plant laying down, you get more roots, and because of more roots, you have more roots mining out the nutrients for that tomato plant. And the more roots you have, the less complications you're going to have. The more roots you have, the more moisture, the more nutrients you're going to be having. If you improve the root area by 200 or 300%, you're improving the tomato plant itself. You're supplying its needs for the rest of the summer, because it has no excuse then for not producing 100 or 200% more tomatoes than it did and before. But try this. Take the original Better Boys or Parks Whopper Improved, take the suckers from them, and then root them in a contraption like this that I've showed you how to do, and then keep those in the shade for about 7 or 8 days. Then plant them in the garden by laying them down. Compare to what you get with the others, the original tomato plant, and what you get from this method I've shown you. You will double or triple your tomato yields, I promise you. The old gardener, Jim Bennett, stand up for those things that make America great and strong, and I'll see you in church this Sunday. God bless you.